welcome to Straight Talk Live. I am Rick Snyder, one of your co-hosts, and thrilled to bring you this episode today. To give you a little background on Straight Talk Live, if you're joining us for the first time, we are a nonprofit, and we're really focused on this relationship around human transformation, digital transformation, and social impact. And really all this came from the whole COVID situation where Af and I were in our bunkers in San Diego and London and not satisfied by the conversations that were happening in the world and the media news cycles, and really hungering for what are the things we need to be discussing, the topics we need to be talking about, getting underneath that, and in order to really look at how we need to reset our relationships to the earth, to ourselves, to each other, to our businesses, to our families, to our communities. And that really was the inception and inspiration for this show. And so I'm the CEO of Invisible Edge, author of Decisive Intuition, and really excited to also introduce my partner in crime, Af Malhotra. Af.
Hey, thank you, Rick. Again, welcome audiences from all over the world. It's a real pleasure to have you on the show again. Once again, I always say I'm very excited. I'm even more excited today because we have a fantastic thought leader, I guess a philosopher, historian, economist, a climate commentator, all in one, in fact, with Charles Eisenstein. So I'm terribly excited today. I'm the co-creator of Straight Talks Up Live, as you know, and also the co-founder of Growth Enabler, an AI disruptor and marketplace that banks are relying on today to change their game and change their trajectory. So let's crack on. And Rick, over to you.
Okay, without further ado, I'm going to introduce to you Charles Eisenstein. He's a speaker, a writer, and he's focusing on the themes of human culture and identity. He's the author of several books, most recently Sacred Economics and The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible, and his newest book, Climate, A New Story. And if you've been paying attention in the cultural memes around the coronavirus and conspiracies, he's got a couple amazing essays called The Coronation and the Conspiracy Myth that came out in the last few months. And I just want to say before I formally bring you on, Charles, is just we live in a world that's polarized right now, and it's either the mainstream narrative or the conspiracy narrative. And for me, I've been hungering to find more and more voices that are integrating, that are not polarizing, that are bringing together. And for me, Charles, you have one of those voices that helps bring some sanity to an often crazy-making experience. So thank you, Charles. Welcome to Straight Talk Live.
Well, thank you, Rick. I appreciate that introduction, and that you think I'm sane.
We'll find out in the next 60 minutes if that's actually accurate, but that will be fun. Okay, so let's dive right in. And I think a friend of mine introduced me to your work about 5 years ago, and I've been following a lot of your threads, and just I love where you put your attention. So that's where I want to start this episode. What really has your attention right now, given the state of the world? Last time we spoke 5 weeks ago, there was the whole COVID situation that was hot, and then civil unrest ever since then. It's even a different world since we last spoke. So I'd love to really get a sense of your pulse right now on what really has your attention at this stage.
Yeah, so those things have my attention, but underneath those, something that you just said in your introduction, that you thought that something's being left out of the conversation. This isn't the conversation we should be having. I think that in both of these issues, COVID-19 and civil unrest, racial justice, we're seeing an incredible, intense polarization, and that you can even call information warfare or narrative warfare, where it's not only like it was maybe 10 or 20 or 30 years ago, where the two sides disagree about the interpretation of the facts, but it's that they disagree on the facts themselves, and they have their own separate sources of facts and their own way to obtain facts. So that's almost like there's not even a conversation that can be had. It's as if reality is splintering into multiple shards, and you get lost in each one of these shards. It's like a prism that filters out certain information and brings in other information, and it's like you're in this separate reality. So what I've been really, so this is what I've been, this has been on my mind a lot, and what to do about it, and how to engage these debates without validating the debate itself. Like anytime you engage in a debate, you're saying, yeah, I agree, this is what we should be talking about. The problem is that these debates obscure what we should really be talking about, in my opinion. The underlying causes of these, of say, racial injustice, of police brutality, of the health crisis, the ecological crisis, the financial crisis. All of these things are rooted in unconscious conditions that I think we really need to start talking about and start recognizing. So that's a little bit of what I've been thinking about. And yeah, and especially when it comes to race relations and justice, the template of writing certain people off is actually the template of racism. To dehumanize somebody. And that's what we're seeing in these ferocious debates, where the explanation for why the other side doesn't agree with us is that they are some version of horrible. They are ignorant, they are malicious, they, you know, the dehumanization that you see in comments sections is intense. And I don't, anyway, I could go on and on, but maybe I'll let you comment or something.
Yeah, I think you're spot on in my intuitive experience too, on what's happening. And let's get to what you just said a moment ago. Also, is what are some of those underlying conditions that we're not talking about? What are some of those questions we're not asking that get underneath some of the flare-ups that we're seeing socially, politically, racially, all the things that are happening right now? What are you sensing are some of those underground collaborators?
Okay, well, so when it comes to police violence, say, to take that as one topic, imagine you become a police officer. You've spent your entire childhood watching films, like every depiction of police work and crime that you've seen in the mass media, in entertainment, in movies, in comic books, is basically that crime is caused by criminals. Criminals are criminals because they're bad. Like there's no explanation really, or at most a very cartoonish explanation for why the Joker or Lex Luthor or the Penguin or what was his name? Thanos, you know, or whoever it is bad. Like they're just bad, you know? And so there you are out in the streets, conditioned to be looking for bad people. Now, there's a racist element here, because very often the portrayal of bad people is somebody who's of a different race. Plus, you might be more afraid of somebody of a different race. And add to that, a system where you are rewarded for arrests, where you have this mentality of deterrence and punishment as a code for justice. Like, can we even have some conception of justice that doesn't equate to punishment? So you're in that totality of circumstances, and then you have a gun, and you're afraid. Like, you know, you've seen how bad these bad people are. I think that police violence is inevitable given those conditions. And that means that no amount of diversity training or examining your privilege is really going to change those circumstances. And then not to mention what is yeah, maybe there is a lot of crime in, it's actually more a matter of class than race, to be honest. But yeah, there are higher rates of crime in poor urban ghettos and in other poor communities. Well, is that because there's a higher concentration of bad people there? Or is it because of generational trauma that has been passed down through the DNA? I mean, there's research now that shows that trauma can be passed through the DNA, not to mention the cultural circumstances, not to mention the addiction, not to mention the family legacy. And then there's the poverty. And then there's the fact that families have been destroyed through incarceration. And then there's the fact that the only male role models and the only business opportunities and way to advance yourself is in the illegal drug trade. Okay. Like, are we talking about any of that? Or is it about how racist individual cops are or how racist police are in general? So, and I'm not saying that they aren't or that there's not a problem there, but it's like, what gets left out of the conversation when we define an issue that is easily, and which issues do we define? It's the ones that lend themselves easily to us versus them thinking. So we're trapped in this prison of this conceptual prison of seeing the world in terms of us versus them. And there's a deeper root of that as well, which I could talk about, but I'll just leave it there for now.
So sorry, Charles, I think you touched on a very important point, and it's a thread from past episodes that we've been running and future episodes that we're going to be running around, inclusion. And in fact, one of the sessions we're doing in the future is to try and ascertain whether diversity is dead and whether it's all a fallacy, in large organizations. And there's so many threads that we can pull from here, but I want to go back to what you just said a second ago and get your opinion and views on this. So if you think about what's going on in the world right now, so the questions we forgot to ask and the assumptions that we all make and the perceptions that we all carry, and when we say that's good and that's bad, oh, it's terrible that people are protesting, surely they should have found a better time to do this. We're dealing with Corona right now. Oh my God, how insensitive. Whatever it may be. And, let's imagine we're right in the middle of this. I had the pleasure of just recently getting exposed to this, 12 or 13 page letter that Martin Luther King wrote in Birmingham jail, 1963. And if you hadn't told me it was him writing it and you gave it to me and you said, hey, listen, have a read of this, I really would have thought someone wrote it in 2020. That's 57 years ago. That's how behind the curve we are. That's when you realize actually the sort of change that you thought has happened and the progress that we've made is real. You start to realize how we're stuck in a bit of a time warp because this divide or bipolarity between people continues to exist. So my kind of thought or the question to you really is, back to the questions we forgot to ask. Now, these protests are going on, and it's been good in a certain way because it's raising the topic again and people are having these discussions. Some people are divided. In the UK and London, where we live and where I live, there were riots, or there were protests that turned into riots on both sides. And there's a school of thought that says, actually, it's better to be bipolar. At least you have an opportunity to then argue or discuss your points or be clear about the fact that you stand on one side and the other stands on the other. Martin Luther King basically said the problem is with the people in the middle. The problem is with the people in the middle who are neutral or undecided and actually aren't fighting any of the causes. And so go out 5 years. What is your view on race relations and how important do you think diversity and inclusion and whatever terminology we want to use? Sometimes I hate using those terms because they get so trite and boring. But whatever the term may be, some sort of balance in society. Where is it going? What are you seeing from historic analysis and future analysis?
Okay, so it's fun for me to talk about this because, again, we're in such a polarized moment that anything that someone says is immediately first run through the filter of, okay, which side are they on?
Right.
Is it okay to even listen to this person, to give them a platform, to give them a listening? So that's a little fun for me to try to say things that are confusing in the sense that they don't fit into one or another narrative. Because as far as it's the people in the middle that are the problem, consider this scenario. Say that you are living in a horrible concentration camp, and the people running the concentration camp decide to have an election, finally. You get to choose the camp mascot. In fact, South Park had an episode about this, where they were choosing the school mascot. And one side nominated a giant douche and the other side nominated a turd sandwich. And they had like this big, fight about it. It's like, okay, when you devote all of your energy to that question, you're not talking about stopping the concentration camp. You're not talking about liberation. You're talking about something that, because of its relative triviality, enables the status quo to continue because it's a distraction. And it's only at most a superficial level of change. So yeah, I can apply that to diversity and inclusion. The goal of, to say that the goal of the civil rights movement or the goal of feminism or the goal of the gay rights movement is only inclusion and diversity neuters the revolutionary potential of these movements. It's not to say, let's allow Black people and women and gay people, et cetera, to join the boardroom and help administer the world-destroying, exploiting machine. That's not, let's elevate women to positions in the patriarchy that lays waste to the world. So it's not so. I don't think that what we're really seeking is inclusion as the highest goal. It's more that it's actually, the marginalized knocking at the door. It's not, let's let them in and include them in the world destroying machine. It's let's come out to play with them and engage the world in a different way, a world that has been preserved by the marginalized and especially by the indigenous, who are the most marginalized. Maybe they know something that we don't. So if, I've had opportunities to be on, there was one or two times where I was invited to be on a panel or something or part of some program, and it's all white males, not even any women, And there was one time where I was like, I really don't want to be in this panel because, do you need another white male in this panel? There was 8 of us, all these big shots, except me. And then the organizers just scurried into these apologetics, oh my God, we didn't notice, Charles, thank you for pointing this out, et cetera, et cetera. We'll do something about it. I'm like, you don't understand. The reason that I don't want to be on an all white male panel isn't because of equity and inclusion and diversity. It's because all white male panels tend to suck. And if you broaden that, extend that to our entire society, it kind of sucks. It's not working. It's not working in ecological terms. It's not working in psychological or social terms. This whole hierarchy of privilege that says it's working for the 1% takes for granted the values of the 1%, takes for granted the dominant values of this civilization, which upholds as the pinnacle of success a 5,000 square foot house with a big yard, and you order everything through your computer and it comes to your house and you have plenty of money. And really? Is that where you find the people on this earth who radiate joy and fulfillment? Do you find them in Greenwich, Connecticut? Do you find them in the city of London? No, you don't find them there. You find them in a Caro village in Peru. You find them in a traditional village in rural India, or among the Hadza of where are they? Tanzania. That's where you find actual happy people. And that means that for us to have authentic, deep change, radical change that goes to the root, we have to, open the door and step out, and not to say that, well, the system that we've operated is the best. So out of the goodness of our hearts, we're going to let everybody else in. Now, if you take that for granted, the system for granted, then diversity and inclusion, to share the pie, that is obvious. And that might be even a step. But the critique, like Martin Luther King, he was not just about giving Black people an equal role in capitalism, because he understood that capitalism requires some groups to be exploited. And if it's not Black people, it's going to be somebody else. You have to have an underclass for capitalism as we know it. So this is a whole other conversation, like what is capitalism and how does it change when capital changes? Because what is capital? It is agreements about money and property. It is agreements. So that's a whole other thing. But for now, let me just say capitalism as we know it. Martin Luther King understood that it requires an exploiting and an exploited class. And he would not have endorsed the idea that to flip the roles of the exploited and the exploiter is any kind of solution.
I really like this theme here, Charles, if I can just jump in here, that what if I were to summarize in one way is it's not just about including more people to eat the pie, but we need to change the meal to a much more healthy meal for all. And I want to tie this to something that you shared before in one of our talks that we had a few weeks ago. We were speaking to the former COO of a major insurance firm yesterday, and he had a brilliant idea around one of the problems is that how board level is incentivized in companies, where they're incentivized to have their own short-term gains. And because of that, because they're so heavily incentivized, they don't care. They don't give a shit about the masses, about the key stakeholders when it really comes down to it. They are not vested in that conversation. So he was talking about that and really looking at different models of incentivization. So I wanted to tie that with you to one of your favorite phrases that I like from you, that you bring is around the cult of quantity. And this topic around the cult of quantity. Can you get into that a little bit around what is the cult of quantity and how the heck do we break that?
Oh boy. Okay.
Welcome to Straight Talk Live, Charles.
Yeah, that's a huge topic. And it's related to the previous theme of what gets left out and who gets left out. When you reduce a problem to a certain formalization. So the problem with, so basically for something to be scientific, you have to base it on data. You have to base it on the analysis of quantities. That's what makes, in fact, that's what science is. Science is the study of the quantifiable. If it's not quantifiable, if it's not measurable, then it's not within the realm of science. So because science is the paramount religion of our society, and that's another conversation, why do I call it a religion? Doesn't mean it's bad or powerless. But because it is the dominant religion, the standard of legitimacy in our society, we tend to make decisions by the numbers. Like show me the data, give me a reason, cost-benefit analysis. We borrow this, of course, from financial accounting and the theory of the firm in economics, and the theory of the individual, that we're all seeking to maximize our self-interest, and that self-interest can be measured in dollars. So one problem with operating that way is that maybe we don't include everything in our quantities. Second problem, maybe some things we can't include in our quantities. Like we can't measure it. So one is we don't bother to because we think it's not important. Second is we can't. Third is that there are things in this world that are fundamentally qualitative, that are immeasurable. So as for the first, like let's again look at the race conversation. As all of this protesting is going on, there are tens of millions of people on Earth, mostly Black and brown, who are starving to death right now as a result of lockdown. There were millions before lockdown. Now there are tens of millions. And it could be by the end of this year, hundreds of millions, according to the UN. I'm not seeing people so indignant that they are like, this has to stop. We are going to be out in the streets until it stops. Society as we know it cannot go on. This is intolerable, because they are not part of the numbers. They're not part of the COVID-19 epidemiological numbers upon which policy is made. And they're not part of the police brutality numbers. They're just, they're just not in the conversation of race. And in fact, these days, Democrats are as hawkish, if not more hawkish, when it comes to the foreign policies and the neoliberal economic policies that bankrupt and impoverish the rest of the world. So anyway, so that's an example of what we don't measure. And then there are, of course, the things that, as I was saying, are not measurable. Like, can you actually convert life to money, or the good to money? Can you put a price on everything? And if you can't, then any corporate or government policy that is based on maximizing GDP, maximizing revenue, or maximizing any proxy for the good, even if it's triple bottom line, even if it's GPI or gross national happiness or something like that, there's going to be things that are left out. And this, in my mind, calls us not to abandon that way of making decisions, but to come out and play with other ways of knowing, other ways of choosing, which actually we already do. I mean, the idea that we actually make decisions by the numbers is largely a fiction. A friend of mine used to work for an investment bank in the mergers and acquisitions department. And there was an acquisition going to happen. So his boss is like, okay, I need you to run the numbers, and value this company and so on and so forth. And so he comes up, pulls an all-nighter, comes to his boss with the paper, with the data. And his boss is like, no, that's not right. That's not valuable enough. So he just goes in and changes some numbers. Like, we use the numbers and the logic and the reasons to justify and rationalize what we actually wanted to do anyway.
Right.
Yes, that's right.
And in business too, you have a CEO who's got a gut instinct. He's got an impulse. This is what we should do. And maybe his middle management, his team, they're going to be skeptical. Maybe there's a skeptical part of himself that mirrors those people. So he has to somehow come up with some numbers to assuage the inner and outer bean counters that this is okay. But is that really where the decision is coming from? And this is not to say that the financials are irrelevant. They're just part of the information stream that feeds the intuition.
Exactly. And this is even when they've interviewed judges in the courts of law. And of course, they're trying to be as objective as possible, ideally. When they're interviewed, it often comes down to a intuition about what they feel based on all the data points. Even in the court of law, right? And so that's just the human nature. I think they say 95% of how we get information is emotional and energetic first, and then we start to compute what that means to us mentally.
So do you think, going back to this concept, I remember in the last call you talked about another thing that stayed with me, which was, again, related to, I think you called this the cult of, the
cult of quantity.
The cult of quantity. And I think when we're talking about the cult of quantity, there was another piece, which was the tyranny of time, or the tyranny of the clock, that we talked about. And I think if you look at the new economic models, the new social models, the new geopolitical, with hope, a glass half full approach would be maybe geopolitics will start to look a little bit better. I'm hoping, over the next 5 or 10 years. Who knows? Maybe we're moving away from globalism into nationalism. That could be good for some, bad for others. Time will tell. What is your view on, and this is an important one because you were talking about impoverished people, we're talking about people who are hungry, you're talking about those numbers going from tens of millions to hundreds of millions. There are a lot of people who are not in highly skilled roles. They're not the big coders and the AI developers or the investment bankers, frankly, and that's the majority of the population of the world. These are the people who are on the other end of the spectrum around capitalism. They're the grassroots workers. Many of these people might be unemployed in the future, and they're thinking about roles and skills and things like that. But I think just talk to us a little bit about your view on, just to educate the audience and let them think about things in a slightly different way, I guess. We've come from the post-industrial revolution era where we've been so fixated on the clock, 9 to 5, whatever, 9 to 6, constantly looking at the watch. You should take you 30 minutes to do this. Activity-based management, clocking in, clocking out, and so on and so forth. And it continues, by the way. It's still happening, not just in Western economies, but also in Eastern developing economies. So tell us a little about what you think is going to happen then. So are we going to still be burdened by the tyranny of the clock? Do you think there's a revolution coming? Do you think people are going to say, no, enough of this? One protest will lead to another 1,000? Where are you putting your money?
All right. So before I get into that very juicy topic, I want to say that I'll offer a meta comment, which is, what do I see coming? What's going to happen? There's a certain powerlessness and loss of agency in that question. Because in fact, the future is ours to create. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be coming unless we make it come, unless we acquiesce to it, unless mm-hmm. we claim it or claim some different future. And right now we have a special opportunity to do that because of the accelerating breakdown of normal. Mm-hmm. So choices that were unconscious are becoming conscious right now. For example, quarantine and lockdown, is that permanent? Are we going to have a world of isolation, risk minimization, and the loss of sociality? Or are we going to reclaim those things? Reclaim gatherings mm-hmm. and group hugs and festivals and big weddings. And maybe not put safety on the altar as our highest value.
Yeah.
So to claim, what future are we going to claim? So the clock, I may have mentioned in our earlier conversation, is the fundamental invention of the Industrial Revolution. More fundamental than the steam engine, more important than petroleum or electricity. It is, you have to have coordination of time in order for factory processes to work. Mm-hmm. And in the post-industrial era, if we are actually in the post-industrial era, computers that run on clock too. Mm-hmm. And require a very precise coordination of processes. So I'm not really sure if we are actually past the industrial era, but certainly, as you're saying, fewer and fewer people are required to produce the same amount of stuff. This is the classic crisis of capitalism, actually. When a man is replaced by a machine, which can do the work of 1,000 men, then either you have 999 people unemployed, or there is a different solution: you consume 1,000 times more. That has been actually the solution of capitalism for several hundred years. To avert the crisis of unemployment and falling profits and the whole Marxian crisis, you have to continually expand consumption. That's called economic growth. And when your own market gets saturated, then through colonialism, you find new markets to keep the economy growing. And economic ideology says that we are all becoming better and better off because we're getting more and more goods and services. We're becoming more and more specialized. They're being produced more and more efficiently. And if it's called a good, that means it must be good. You wouldn't buy it if it weren't good. So you wouldn't sacrifice your utility to get this other thing unless it was even better. So there's this whole economic ideology that is, again, comes down to the cult of quantity. That the good is something that can be denominated in dollars and cents. But the ideology says things are getting better and better. This is what progress is. And now, because of ecological limits, because of social limits, because of political limits, because of medical limits, we seem to be, again, facing a crisis of growth. Really, the fundamental economic crisis today is that economic growth is slowing down. Consumption is slowing down. So if we are not going to consume more and more, then we're going to have to work less and less. at least work less and less for commodities and the quantifiable. However, if you believe that there is more to life than quantity, then maybe there is a value in inefficiently growing food in your garden rather than eating vegetables from gigantic monocrop farms or robotified hydroponics factories. Because maybe there's something else in those vegetables that you grew in your own garden or that your neighbor grew. Maybe there's some kind of energy that is infused into those vegetables from the land that you walk with your own feet. Mm-hmm. There's a relationship there. Most indigenous people believed and still believe something like this, that food to eat something is an intimate act. Mm-hmm. You're bringing all of the solar and geological vibrations into your body, and yet you can't be fully nourished by factory farmed food grown 1,000 miles away. This is not something that science can measure. I'm not going to say, oh, and there's a study that proves this, although there may be studies that demonstrate positive effects of locally grown food. But what I'm saying is that this is just an example of something that might be outside of our systems of quantification, that cannot be captured by economic growth, and that can motivate a different kind of labor or provide a different motivation for our labor and for our creativity, maybe and a different conception of progress. Progress has meant to produce things more efficiently.
Correct.
But the very concept of efficiency depends on quantification. Efficiency relative to what unit of account, So if we want I can foresee a different future, not as an inevitability, but as something we can claim, where we become richer and richer in all of the things that we cannot measure, where every object that we surround ourselves with was made with great care and attention by an artist, where every building is beautiful and perfectly coordinated with its environment, where the loudest sound that you can hear most of the day is children laughing and birds singing. There's another vision of progress, and we're seeing indications that that is possible, as China, I believe, just has adopted a policy of returning to the land. Maybe this urbanization has gone far enough.
Yeah.
In India, many people are returning to the land as well. They're going back to the village, the migrant laborers, and maybe they're not going to come back. Like maybe village life, even if it is economically inefficient, has a value. Your garden is inefficient. I don't know if you have a garden, but if you calculate how much money you're saving by growing your own food, you're getting paid like 13 cents an hour, It's not efficient. It's irrational, according to economic logic. And how do we translate this into business? I mean, I know many of your listeners are entrepreneurs, and so this would be another topic we could go into, but maybe I'll just stop there with that groundwork.
What that touches into for me, Charles, is when you talk about the story of separation as one of those under vibes that's under all of this conversation. And this is something that speaks very deeply to me, is how disconnected am I from my food supply chain, where I don't have a garden right now. I can barely keep a succulent plant alive, to be honest. And so that whole thing around, what does that take for us to get reconnected to ourselves, to our backyards, to the land, to each other? Anything else that you wouldn't want to say about the story of separation and how that is really the crux, one of the big questions we're not talking about?
I could go into the story of separation. Maybe I'll get there by speaking to, it doesn't have to be your garden. Really, it's even a software engineer can approach his or her work in the spirit of gift, in the spirit of reverence, in the spirit of beauty. Anybody can be an artist. To be an artist means that you're not just serving the market. You're not just serving the customer. You're not just serving the profit potential, but you're doing it better than you need to for any rational reason. If you look at Just what's coming to mind right now is shaker furniture. Have you ever seen shaker furniture?
Never.
It's
No.
the perfect marriage of aesthetics and utility. And these objects, you look at these chairs and they're just vibrating with life. How did they do that? It was through a kind of a reverence for the object itself. So if you're writing an app, here are the specifications, here's what it's supposed to do. And then you have like some idea. It could be an Easter egg, or it could be like some really elegant way to do it. And it's going to take you more time and you're not going to get paid anymore. And maybe no one will ever even notice. Or at least if they notice, they won't know that it was you. You won't get paid in money. You won't get paid in credit. You won't get paid in anything. But your relationship with that object, that software, that virtual object, becomes one of devotion. It's a devotional relationship. So really underneath all of the gardening, the healing work, I mean, everything, it comes down to a devotional attitude toward the world rather than an extractive attitude toward the world. And this does get into the story of separation because and it's really a mythology that I'm talking about that says that human beings who we are is separate, discrete, separate units, individuals in a world of other competing individuals that is separate from ourselves and that doesn't have the qualities of a self. The world itself is just a bunch of stuff. It's a bunch of generic particles bouncing around according to mathematical forces, atoms and void, upon which we project meaning, upon which we impose design and exert control, and thereby imprint intelligence into a world that has none. That's called progress. And that is a mythology. It's a story. It's other people, other cultures didn't believe that. They thought the world was bursting with beings, that everything was conscious, that everything was alive, that there was purpose outside of human purpose, and that we could participate in that purpose. Our institutions and our systems are built on the mythology of separation. So devotion, reverence for that which is outside of ourselves and the spirit of contributing to this larger unfolding of beauty and intelligence and life, that is in a different mythology of reunion, of connection, of interdependence, of ecology, of interbeing, of relationality. That is the act of devotion, the act of the artist, the act of the philanthropist, the giver. Those are at home in this new story, new for civilization, but very ancient, actually, this new and ancient story. And this is what my work is about. It's like, okay, that's a nice philosophy. How do we translate that into systems, into practices? How can we analyze or understand medicine, education, politics, crime, health, et cetera, through the lens of a transition in our stories? That's kind of like a base level. But I would just really, on a non-conceptual level, simply call to that part of everybody, anyone listening. I mean, can't you feel the yearning to add to the beauty of the world? Why would you do that? The mind says, well, maybe it'll benefit me, but what if it doesn't? Is it always a good business strategy? A lot of times it is. A lot of times we get surprised. The things that we did out of devotion, out of care, end up helping ourselves anyway. After all, in the new story of interbeing, we're not separate from the world that we are beautifying and enlivening. The world is part of ourselves. But even if you do not get any measurable benefit from creating a business more beautiful, a garden more beautiful, an object more beautiful than it needed to be for any external reason, still you are enriched by that act of creation. And this is a source of joy not easily available to people in a market economy. But we can reclaim it, and not only reclaim it personally, but also work to reclaim it collectively as well. And to build a world on that, to build a politics on that, to build systems on that.
Charles, who do you think, with the same note, think of East and West, so Western civilization and China, India, the Eastern nations. Who do you think is more able or has the foundations to be able to realize what you've just articulated? Who's in a better position?
Every civilization has a gift to offer to this process. Every civilization has gone through a journey of separation. Many of the same institutions of oppression, slavery, ecocide arose in every civilization. It's not an accident. It's not just the civilization that arose in the Middle East and spread to Europe that had patriarchy, debt, social class, misogyny, slavery, et cetera, ecocide. This happened everywhere. It happened in China, it happened in India, North America, South America, everywhere where civilization arose, you had the same phenomena. And of course, they developed along different lines. Each civilization also preserved some of the ancient knowledge and coded it into its stories, into its wisdom lineages, into its esoteric traditions, into its religion. And now the time is here for each civilization to offer up its gifts toward the transformation of all civilizations. And a lot of these necessary gifts were held by indigenous people. And many of them now also recognize that the time to offer these gifts to the world is here. So, yeah, it's not that China or India is closer to this way than others. I mean, in some ways, if you go into Chinese energetics and medicine, or Indian
Ayurveda
cultivation techniques. Well, yeah, you could say Ayurveda too, but I'm really thinking of like the spiritual technologies of India. These are treasures to this world, and I think are really important. So every culture has its offering in the program of reunion.
In the tapestry of humanity. Yeah. I love that. I want to open this up to some audience questions. And so those of you listening, please send in your questions right now on whatever channel you're listening from. But we have a couple already that are popping up. So let's bring the audience in on this. So this is from Jonathan. Given social media's structural bias towards furthering the information narrative warfare, what are the forums you see that are working for a different kind of narrative?
I'm not an expert in these things. I do think part of it is structural, just the way that algorithms work on Facebook and stuff, that in creating these echo chambers, and maybe some of the new developments in distributed peer-to-peer networks, bear some promise in that regard. But I think that the architecture of the social networks, in part, is an emanation of our own habits, our own psychological habits, and our own programming. To think of the world, for example, in us versus them terms, to think of the cause of a bad thing as being bad people, to see improvement in the world as the result of some kind of triumph, some kind of conquest. some kind of domination. Like the basic template of domination long precedes social media. So you could say that just like the money system, social media rests on a deeper psychic foundation. And as that foundation changes, as we embrace new values of the values of interbeing, the values of compassion, the values of non-judgment, the understanding that if I were in the totality of your circumstances, I might be doing what you're doing. So let me understand those circumstances. As the realization that there is a lot more to reality and possibility than we have been told, our systems, including social media, will feel more and more out of line with our consciousness. We will feel less and less comfortable there. You'll feel less and less, wow, I don't really vibe with Facebook, you know? And is it because of this? Is it because of the comments? Is it because of the ads? Is it? I'm not sure, but there's a kind of a frequency that I no longer feel at home in. And does that mean that there's a ready-made alternative? I wish. I'm exploring setting up a mighty network right now. But, you know, like, I really like a lot of their functionality. It's kind of corporate, you know, they're sending me marketing messages. I'm like, So I'm not sure. I'm exploring high-low as well. It's not quite as robust. You know, I don't have, oh, here's the platform of the new story. But many people are seeking to create it and are exploring it. And I think that's really important work.
I think it's also a generational thing. I think as you were speaking, talking about social media, because it's a space we play in, if you think about the younger generation, I won't label them, but the younger than me and younger than us, I guess, you've got TikTok and you've got Insta. And it's phenomenal. I always thought I was really cool, quite trendy when it came to technology, and I operate in technology. I'm in AI and so on, but I haven't managed to fathom TikTok. I think it's very powerful and it's incredible. But I've been watching some of these videos, and it goes back to this whole new sort of world that we're trying to create for ourselves, hopefully a better world. And there'll be realization, and then maybe there'll be 4-day weeks. I don't know. Fingers crossed. We're talking about it here in the UK, trying to model what New Zealand is doing and so on. But question for you, I mean, you don't have to answer it, but just your thoughts. When you've got this generation, a younger generation that lives on social media and a different type of social media, it's not an intellectual, necessarily a discussion around, you know, you comment and I comment and I have this long essay that I write and you write an essay back. It's not that sort of way of existing. Social media now is about my funny video of this 30-second mime that I'm going to do, or I don't know, something generally fun for them, but that's your identity now. That's the identity of this generation. And it has to be quick and fast and rapid. They don't have time to be pensive and reflect. They just want to move on to the next thing. So if that's the next generation that we're relying on, whilst I'm totally buoyant about that generation, because many of them are so tuned into ecology, tuned into the differences that we have and embracing similarities. They're tuned into climate change. You know, the Greta Thunberg movement has sort of re-energized them as well, and so on and so forth. But again, your view on this from the point of view of not the millennials, not the Gen X, I mean, whoever, the younger population, you know, what's your very quickly, what's your take on them, and how instrumental do you think they're going to be with this new reality that we're entering into? Have they forgotten to ask questions as well, or they were never given the opportunity to ask those questions?
In some ways, the next generation is more damaged than my generation. Their attention span is shorter. Their immersion in artificial images is more complete than it was for me. Because, and I could go into how television and video games hijack the brain's ability to create images and make people dependent on externally created images, and how the constant barrage of intense stimuli conditions us to intense stimuli and makes us unable to even notice subtleties and to hold attention for a long time. Yet, at the same time, these obstacles can become a source of strength. The greater the wound, the more powerful the healing. This sounds a little new agey, but a lot of amazing beings are being born into this world that are perhaps becoming strong because of this environment. And also, every curse also bears a blessing. So these technologies, these highly fragmented, fast-paced, ephemeral ways of expressing ourselves, they open up new capacities as well. So I do think that it is important to preserve some ways of expressing ourselves that do require sustained attention. I mean, I write long form essays, but like a lot of young people read those too, or listened to them. So I'm not sure if it's really as bad as I sometimes think. Sorry, I don't have any profound insights to say.
I think the perspective is what I was seeking. Courtney Cole says something interesting here. I just wanted to read that out, Rick and Charles. I think it's nicely framed. She says, it seems that this generation at once wants to change the world and at the same time, I guess, just distract themselves from looking at the reality of it. I can relate to that with the young generation that we engage with. Thank you for that, Courtney. I think there's another question. Rick, do you want
to? This is a great question as we're winding down here from Linda, who says, Charles, do you have other venues where you're bringing this conversation to more people who want to be in this rich creative growth mindset you've helped us begin to cultivate today? I'd love to hear some of those places that you bring your work.
I mean, like I said, I do mostly long form stuff. So, I have my website and I have online courses and, I've written books and stuff. But what I've been really realizing is that you cannot hold a new story by yourself. I can't hold it by myself.
Right.
A mythology is held in community. And if you diverge too far from what the people around you are saying and thinking and doing, then they're going to pressure you and you're going to feel internal pressure. It's like, am I crazy here? Why is nobody else saying this? So I'm looking to create a online community now simply to hold each other in the various dimensions of a new story, to remind each other that we're not crazy. So I am creating that. So like, if you want to be part of that, eventually I'll announce that on my newsletter, but I'm still, that'll probably be, maybe a month away. And I'm a little hesitant to get into it because, oh my God, am I going to be spending more time online if I do that? So, and do I even have to do that when this consciousness is arising in so many places? But yeah, I do feel there's a need. Like I might be on a program like this and awaken something in somebody or amplify something that was growing in them or give voice to something that they'd been thinking. And people want to nourish that. And so I am looking to create a community to do that. So like, I don't have to be, the one holding it, which is beyond my capacity, actually. I need community too.
Amen. And that's a big part of what we're doing at Straight Talk Live also. And one thing I want to let the audience know is we're going to be showcasing all of our speakers' bios and information. So Charles, if there's any links to what you're talking about now and you want to give that to us, we're happy to put that on our page for you also so that people can streamline right to what you're doing in this moment.
You just have to put my website now because this is going to be, in a month probably or a few weeks.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah. Good.
Well, we are winding down, and do you just want to mention your website? How can people find out more about you and your work?
It's charleseisenstein.something.org. Yeah.
You got a 33% chance here. Which one is it?
I think all of them go to the same place.
Okay. Smart man. Yeah. Good. I just want to say what a pleasure and blessing it is having you on here. My big takeaway in one way, which is really profound, is shifting from a relationship of extraction to a relationship of devotion and connection. And there's so many ways that can play out. And I think that's so important for each of us to find our own version of that in the worlds that we live, and a way that's authentic to each of us. But it just feels like that's the direction we need to move, to go from the story that's not working to one that actually does.
Yeah, well said.
Thank you so much for being on here. Af, you have any final words as well?
I think you summed it up beautifully. Charles, it's a pleasure to have you on our show, and I think we'd love to have you back when the time is right for you and for us to go deeper into what's going to happen next, and what can we predict, or what can we pontificate on. But what a great set of essays you've framed, and really pleased to have someone like you who's thinking in this unique and compelling way. And let's keep the conversation open, and God bless you, and hopefully you continue your good work, and we're always here to support you. So thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you, Af. Thank you, Rick.
And really quick plug, next week, same time, we're going to be exploring, is psychological safety the cornerstone for next-gen enterprises, with two amazing leaders in Hema and Kate, who are incredible innovators in their own right. And so that's next week's episode. Charles, thank you again for not just your words, but where you speak from. And thank you for the work you've done.
Thanks.
Okay. Be well, everyone. And same time next week, over and out. Straight Talk Live.